Welcome to the Real Life Groups Leadership Podcast, a conversation about creating small groups where people grow in spiritual maturity in relationship. We're focused on you, the small group leader, giving tips and tools to help you lead effectively. Well, I want to welcome you back to part 2 with Mike Wraith and Santha Yinger. And if you did not listen to our last conversation about mental health and wellness, you need to, because we're going to be building off of that conversation. But today we're going to continue kind of this conversation to you life group leaders about how to respond. And we're going to actually kind of turn a little bit from overall mental health, we talked about patterns, we talked about behaviors to look for, the relational environment that takes place, and how that, just a lot of great conversations. We're not going to recap all that. It was so good, you have to listen to it. We're going to shift gears towards, so what happens when things kind of start to go down a path of crisis? There becomes difficult situations, and all of your well-intended, reaching out, shepherding, it doesn't work anymore.
Yeah.
Right. So that's kind of what we're going to be focusing on this time. And then towards the end, we're going to be talking about tools to support you as leaders, so that, again, the reminder that you're not in this on your own. You have a community. There is a team around you. So let's just start with kind of this question. How do we define crisis?
Yeah.
How do we define crisis?
Yeah. Crisis is a state where anyone can be at, say they're functioning at a certain level. It's their healthy level. Yeah. And all of a sudden they're really not functioning at that level anymore. They've kind of plummeted. I mentioned it in the last podcast. We call it decompensate, to the point where they're not functioning. They can't, almost like they can't move on.
Yep.
And so the things that they take for granted per day that they can achieve, that's all put on hold, because for them, they're in a crisis state. Yep. And they need immediate intervention of some kind.
Yep.
Yeah.
I think the important thing to note is that crisis is different for you as it is for me. Everyone has their own trigger to what could cause a crisis.
Yeah, their crisis. Yeah.
And when you're successful in helping someone in crisis, it's understanding that out of the gate. So you may not relate to what they're going through, but you can still show empathy. Yeah. And you can still get to the level where you can see that they're struggling emotionally with whatever they're dealing with.
Yep.
We all can relate to emotions, right? So finding and recognizing those emotions and starting to call out, and we'll talk about steps and how to do that.
So you're saying you don't necessarily have to have been through that exact situation to empathize.
Right. Yep. And you may not understand why what they're dealing with is a crisis to them.
Yep. Right. So
but but you could still show a connection with them while they're going through it. So.
I think that each person has different capacities, and recognizing that my capacity is not the same as your capacity. Yeah. And that when something begins to impact that I can't function well in relationships, I can't function well in work environments, and I can't function well in family or school settings for a prolonged period, like, 2 weeks at a time, then there's actually there needs to be some intervention.
That's right.
and some stepping into.
Right. And that comes back to knowing them.
Yeah.
And understanding maybe how severe is this, because you've built a relationship with them. Or you've had others in your group who have built a relationship with them.
Absolutely.
And you're listening to them saying, John's not doing well.
Yeah.
And pay attention to those things.
Yeah. So maybe let's get specific. I know this is maybe a little dangerous, but in the context of knowing people in a life group, what are some examples of what this crisis? Again, we know that there's going to be a spectrum of what those crises looks like. But if you're a life group leader and you're going, hey, this is an example of a situation that is going to need some intervention, use that word. What are some of those examples, just to give real-time examples for our people?
Yeah. Well, there's the big one, and they're all big, they're all important. But talking about suicide, we get people, when we were talking earlier about stigma, one of the barriers to managing a situation of suicide is a lot of times people isolate, not talk about what they're struggling with, those thoughts they're having. And so, but that's something I think we'll all probably experience at some point as life group leaders, is having people in our group who are struggling, or they have a family member who's struggling. Yeah. And so again, it comes back to creating a safe place where people can openly talk about what they're struggling with. If they're having thoughts of ending their life, or they have family members who are, there can naturally be a reaction of shame that goes with that. Yep. And so really sort of putting that shame to rest and saying, no, this is safe. You can tell me you're struggling.
Yep.
And again, that comes back to, can you build empathy and show empathy in those situations? So suicide's a real issue, and it's a growing issue in our society.
Yep. And so the different scales of that even would be, there are people who maybe self-harm would be a step in that direction.
Could be. I think it's important to distinguish the two sometimes, because you may have people who self-harm, and that's a practice of coping with their stress. And they may not have an intention of actually killing themselves.
Wow.
But unfortunately, it's very harmful behavior,
Absolutely.
Right? And so we don't want that behavior to continue. So the response is still the same, in the sense that we want to take away the shame part of that, because that's usually what keeps them from wanting to share.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and even we're thinking about that. I think that when we get to suicide and suicidal ideation, that's when we feel like that's in crisis. But there are some other things that you go, hey, it's severe enough that some intervention might help. So if you see self-harming, if you see self-medicating, self-medicating does not just have to be with drugs and alcohol. Self-medicating can be with binge watching consistently, with gaming, with shopping, and just begin to recognize that these, again, we talked about on the other podcast, patterns, and recognizing what are the patterns. And when you see, so there's can be self-medicating, there can be self-harm, even eating disorders. And you begin to think about, often, that anorexia nervosa and bulimia are parts that you begin to go, hey, and sometimes it's not just, it's not overweight or it's underweight. It's an unhealthy relationship with food, because those are hard things to cope with. So even just beginning to recognize some of those things. And again, we want to be here to resource you. Like we just said a whole lot to life group leaders.
Yeah.
That may begin to feel like, oh, I don't know how to do this.
Do I want to do this anymore?
Do I want to do this anymore? But it's like, hey, it's not all on you. It's learning and seeing patterns and being courageous and loving enough to step in to say, is this a pattern that we need to talk about?
That's good.
In the moment of crisis and managing that crisis, a lot of times you need to be ready. You need to be ready to have those conversations. Don't shy away from them.
Yeah.
But also you'll have that point where maybe safety is established.
Yep.
Now it's important, as a life group leader, I need to turn to my community pastor, or I need to turn to my group's pastor.
Yep.
And don't do this on your own.
Yep.
So reach out, get the extra help that you need.
Which would be true for all kinds of crisis. I think that's important for us to remember too. In a variety of stages of where their mental health is at, we have situations we deal with in groups and our community all the time. Affairs, abuse. You talked about addiction. These things that come to the surface as you're in relationship. And again, how deep is that in there? Was it just a decision, or was it their mental health played a big part in getting them to that spot? Probably in most situations it did, right?
Yeah.
But we're going to have to respond.
Yeah, and any crisis is going to impact your mental health. It doesn't mean you have necessarily diagnosed chronic illness. Yep. But we all are impacted when we get traumatic events happen to us. We lose a loved one. We lose a job. Yeah. Even it could be as simple as I had to move my family to a new town. I had to go to a new job. That was super hard on my kids. And now they're not doing well in school. Wow. And now they're doing so.
It's a great example.
Everyone responds differently to transition and change in life situations. Right. And so it's having an understanding that it's not just one or two things that can cause someone to get to that crisis state.
Yeah, that's really helpful.
Yeah, that when there's a diminishment of capacity and just being aware of, trauma or job changes or, sometimes financial situations or economics or arguments and ongoing, relational dissension. Yeah.
Just a fascinating little aside is, we were talking about Disney in the last podcast. One of my favorite, there's so much inside of it, is the movie Inside Out. Just talk about changing locations. Yeah. And if you haven't watched that, it's a fascinating example of mental health taking place. What goes inside?
What's going on inside of your head, and how do you respond to the situations?
Yeah, and recognizing your own emotions. I mean, that, not just to go to the movie, but I mean, it does do a good job of pointing out, our emotions are something that are normal to experience.
Yep.
But even, especially when you're providing intervention with someone, meaning you're connecting with someone while they're in their crisis, if you can recognize the emotions they're going through, that goes so far in creating that safe space.
Love that.
And getting them to want to share more with you.
And we've already talked a lot about relationship, that's a core part of this conversation. We have to, think like a shepherd, care for our people, be watching for patterns. So let's kind of transition now towards, as a leader, as a group, maybe not just the leader, how do we de-escalate? How do we respond when we see something happen, or when we observe, a pattern of behavior that's actually going into crisis? Maybe they're in crisis. What's our response look like?
Yeah.
I think that one of the things that you start off with is compassion and curiosity. Is that you step in with, and you want to understand what's going on before you bring problem solving into it. Is that you want to be curious, and I know that Mike, this is Mike's specialty when it comes to de-escalation and first validating what somebody's feelings are and being able to step in and to validate and to not necessarily say that they're true, but to go, I recognize and that I can see. And so to me, that takes curiosity. What is this person actually feeling versus what's the solution to the issue? And to stepping in there. So Mike has some great tips about this.
Yeah, there's a lot of times when we'll talk about crisis intervention, we'll go to the big topic. We are sometimes dealing with people we don't know, but as a life group leader, hopefully you've built some sort of relationship with that person. So already there's some level of trust. Okay. And you're recognizing that you're there. But part of what in the moment of dealing with crisis and building trust is it's allowing that space where they can vent about what's going on. So you allow them to vent. You have them talk about, this is what's bothering me. I've got this going on. I've lost my job. My wife, she's just left me, whatever the issues they start listening or they start listing out. And then you need to be actively listening. And we've heard that term before, but it really does work. And so active listening is being present, listening at the time. And then at times you may even have to go, let's just pause for a minute. Let me make sure I have this right. And you repeat back to them what you heard. You don't have to be a robot about it, right? Because people can tell, okay, you're going through some kind of script or something.
Totally,
But you could say, you mentioned that you lost your job and your wife left you. I mean, that's got to be really rough. Now, I didn't personally experience that. I don't necessarily have to. But I could recognize and call out the emotion at that time. So you lost your job, your wife left you. Man, I can imagine that would be really hard to go through. I can see that you're really upset and feeling really upset and depressed about that. What else is going on? The importance of continuing with what else is going on. You want to give them that freedom to continue on because there might be more.
Get it all out.
Right. You don't want to cut them off and be like, well, okay, so that's enough for today. Let's only talk about that. You want to transition to, okay, what else is going on? But allow them, after you've done that active listening, allow them to kind of feed back to you. Yeah, that's right. And then give them that space of saying, what else is going on? That's great. Then have them do it again. And then same cycle. Okay, let me make sure I have that right. You just found out you got cancer and all this is other things are going on that you mentioned. Okay, that'd be really hard to go through. And I can see that you're struggling with that. What else is going on?
Wow, that's good.
There's something powerful about just offering the gift of presence. Just being present, being curious, listening, reflecting back, and then going, hey, and if that's not all there is, there's more space. I can handle more space. I can give you more space because often people will only tell you the tip of the iceberg. Can you handle that? And then can you handle, and I'm going to give you space that you can take more and that you're not having to fix me. You're not getting uncomfortable. My emotions are not too much for you. And it's just amazing how much offering that to a person.
That's pretty rare in this culture. They would, give that.
It takes time. And I don't know about how you're wired, Chris, but I like to solve problems. That's just the way I'm wired. In fact, that's when I was getting into this field, that was something I had to work on. It's like, as a counselor, I'm not there to necessarily solve your problem.
Like, here's your fix.
Here's your fix. Do that thing. But in crisis intervention, that tends to be our go-to. We start hearing problem and we go, okay, here's how you fix it.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that'll shut them down most.
Cool. I have a question kind of following up with this idea of active listening and kind of, helping someone mine out and be there. Is that happening? Would you recommend that's happening within a group itself? Is that one-on-one? What's that environment?
I think ideally it is one-on-one, but at times crises don't always work in the most convenient ways, right?
Yeah.
And so you'll find yourself at times someone will have a crisis moment in a group.
Yeah.
And so I think understanding, again, what are our group rules and talking about those things on a regular basis, I think as a life group leader, we're trained to do that. Yeah. Part of it is not rescuing, letting someone out there and be able to vent and talk out things. And if they come to a conclusion, let it be there.
That's good.
I think connecting again with the person's emotions and letting them vent and creating that safe space. Yeah. Avoid problem solving.
Yep.
Problem solving in that moment is not going to be effective.
Yeah.
Now that doesn't mean that we don't get to that problem solving moment, but that's after the crisis has sort of calmed itself down.
That's really helpful. Yeah. So kind of another piece that I want to dialogue a little bit is kind of in the scope of being a life group, right? And in relationship with other people. I absolutely agree with you. There needs to be a place to be able to process and listen. At the same time, you have this group that they do want to support through some difficult circumstances. Mm-hmm. How do we actually not want to fix them, but play a support in a real tangible needs way? Santha, thoughts on that?
Well, I think that sometimes to recognize you got to, and your wife is good at saying this, is you got to lean into the awkward. That sometimes when you see somebody else in emotional distress, it feels awkward.
Yeah.
And here's the reality. I often want to make the awkwardness go away so I feel better.
Yeah.
And it seems like I'm helping them. And sometimes we do some good intentional things as Christian people, like, let's stop and pray for that person, which there's a time to pray, but when somebody's in the thick of it, is actually what you're doing is that you're releasing the pressure off. Wow. So they're actually not really feeling where it's a place that I can express the depth of what I hurt. Yeah. So it's with good intention that you're like, hey, let's pray for, or somebody will hand somebody a Kleenex box. And so like they assume that, and that breaks the bubble.
Yeah.
And I know that there's sometimes, so then you have this strange thing as a life group leader that you're trying to manage.
Totally.
Because there will always be the good, well-hearted intention says, well, see you, honey, you just need to do, and they'll start to fix. So that you actually have to kind of manage, how do I curate this safe space?
That's great.
And that I'm kind of like, hey guys, we're going to give them a minute. Yeah. Maybe just as a standard, you have a Kleenex box that's sitting someplace in your life group setting. So if people need Kleenex, they can themselves know where they can go get it. Mm-hmm. They don't have to have it handled to them. Mm-hmm. I think that you also learn how to it's okay that it's going to get awkward right now. You just manage.
It's okay.
Just say, hey, it's going to feel awkward. And you know what? When, good-hearted person starts to say, hey, you know what? I think that they need more space than they need advice. They just need us to be here than advice. And so that is a challenging thing as a life group leader to create. How do I hold space for this person?
That's great.
And how do I protect the life group? So then you might say sometimes, hey, you might have somebody, a trusted person, say, take them off and continue the conversation. And that just, takes, talking with your life group or your life group pastor, with your group's pastor, with your women's discipleship leader, and maybe even talking through how do I manage curating awkward spaces.
That's so wise.
Because that is part of it. Then the other thing when it comes to, we love to support and connect one another. Often, sometimes when people are having mental, emotional, or even awkward distresses, like marriage or affairs or, depression or things like that, we just kind of go, we're going to let them be off over there. Mm-hmm. And so some literature even talks about it being the no casserole illness. So here's the thing is that if somebody is under no casserole, so you have back surgery, I'm going to bring you dinner.
Yeah.
But you need to go to some counseling sessions.
That's kind of that's your area.
But so learning, hey, you guys are actually, I got somebody who 4 of their family members are in counseling. Mm-hmm. So if 4 of their family members were going to health crises, I would be taking dinner to them on a pretty regular basis.
Yeah.
To learn 4 of your family members are in counseling, let me bring dinner to you every couple of weeks.
Yep.
And so that there's that still love and that helps destigmatize things.
Instead of the awkwardness of how do I help? It's like, I'm going to help in some way.
I'm going to help in some way.
Yep.
Somebody is fighting depression, and you know what? It's snowing or it's rain or it's fall or whatever season it is.
Be the church. Yeah.
Be the church.
Yep.
Go help with it. If it's snow time, go shovel snow. If
when in doubt, just go and help and
go and help and love, and that you continue on what you would do.
That's great.
With somebody who's in any other kind of.
Yep. I love that.
Yeah, your response needs to be the same with love.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah.
They need to feel that they're loved.
Continue to be the church. And I think that's a really great way to kind of go, hey, we don't need to treat these situations like they are leprosy. You know, we're going to play an active part in their life. Yeah. And I just want to acknowledge too, this conversation has been the tip of the iceberg. We talked about that earlier, and we could keep going and going. We'd probably do a 10-part episode on this.
We probably could.
But the good news is we actually have a lot of resources that you guys are both kind of connected to. Yeah. And I don't want to miss kind of sharing that with our group leaders because there's kind of an not unending, but there's a lot more resources than we talked about at this, table. And so maybe Santha, share a few things that you could point people to that would be some next steps that they could take advantage of in equipping and resourcing.
So we here particularly at the Post Falls campus, and then as other campuses have spaces, we're offering classes. We have a great currently it's called Mental Health Response Basics, which you could have Mike come. Mike teaches, and it just delves deeper and deeper into this. We have tips and tools for handling anxiety and depression. We have a trust-based relational intervention, which is a kind of a parenting class. We have an emotional management class that we've been offering part 1 and 2. So we're just finding, our mental health professionals have just stepped up so much and are offering some different classes to help you dive into. And we're just trying to do them in pretty much 3-week slots so that it's short term. That's what we're currently doing.
Yeah. So there's some equipping that we're trying to help our church.
Right. There's some equipping that we can help our church. On our website, we have a website. There's 2 different places. If you says need help, you on our website, you can go there. There's also just in a list of classes that sends you to some different resources. We have some community resources, and we have a resource guide, references of mental health professionals that have been vetted that we go, hey, this would be a good person. Because sometimes you open up the phone book and you go, I know I need some help, but I don't even know where to start. So we have an ongoing list.
And we'll put those links in this specific show notes. So that's helpful. And Mike, tell us a little bit about kind of the resources that you're a part of in our community.
Yeah. So, important to point out, we have a crisis center in our area.
In Coonton County.
It's in Coeur d'Alene. Yeah. And it's 24/7. That means anyone who's going through not an acute, like I'm suicidal necessarily, but they're not coping well, they're not doing well with their crisis. They can go there. They can stay there 24 hours or 24 hours overnight. And they have skilled crisis interventionists there who can help and talk to someone if needed.
Resource.
Also, nationally, and Idaho's just gotten on to being a part of this. There's a new number we can call when we're in crisis, and that's 988. So it's very easy to remember, 988. And what you do is you get an operator who kind of just is trained to sort of triage, okay, what type of crisis is this? Is it something that maybe could just be dealt with over the phone? So you might be just talking to like a suicide hotline person or some kind of a clinician who can help de-escalate over the phone or manage the crisis over the phone. If there's another level to go to where you need the actual crisis intervention mobile response unit to come to your location, they can deploy that person or get law enforcement involved if it gets to that level. So that's a great resource. And I would just say in general, for our community has great counselors. If you're in any kind of situation with trauma, It's important to get with counselors who specialize in that. Not every counselor specializes in that.
That's great.
So really try and do your research, and the church can help point you in that right direction.
Yeah,
that's great.
And then also, I think if you've gone through loss, if you've lost a life and someone close to you has passed on, you need to get into grief counseling.
Grief counseling.
It's important to get connection.
Here too.
Grief share class.
Grief share
and
class.
I think some of the things you guys are saying is just so important. Regardless of if you're a group leader, you're in a group and you're dealing with something, you're not alone. There is support through classes. There's support through our community. Yeah. And I think the reminder really important that anything you're dealing with that you're struggling, get a lot of counsel. And we have a great tool that all of our campuses have a support system upline of groups, pastors, and women's leaders. You talked about that, who are there specifically to process. If you're dealing with a situation, we didn't talk about this. If there's abuse that you hear of, you're bringing that upline. We're reporting. We're not letting those things sit.
Right.
We're going to make sure we're transparent. But we have the support system to be able to deal with that. And I think through a topic like this, it can feel like there's a lot of weight. And to remember, man, we're in the people business, and there's amazing things that take place. We're created in the image of God, but there's also difficulty because of the sinful nature and the world that we're in. But what an incredible gift that we have to be able to impact people. Yeah. So I just want to thank you guys.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's
we
such
get
a blessing.
To bring hope, and we're not alone.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely. Love that. You guys are such a blessing to our church, and this conversation I know will help a lot of our life group leaders. We want to thank you again for engaging in this 2-part series on mental health and wellness. This has been just a treat. Again, group leaders, we're grateful for all that you do. Thank you for the impact and the ministry that you take. You take care of so many people. You minister to people in our community, and we couldn't do it without you. So thank you. We are grateful for the investment you make each week as you reach the world for Jesus, one person at a time, and make biblical disciples in relational environments. For notes from this show and other great resources to help you grow, visit realliferesources.org.